Good morning, everyone. It is now 10:04, and I would like to call us to order for this special called meeting of the Danville City Commission. Today is Thursday, May the 20th. Our only item on today's agenda is a discussion of our budget, and I will promptly turn this over to Mr. Earl Coffey. Earl?
Thank you, Mayor Commissioners. We are not going to be very technical today. There's a couple of things that we need and a couple of things we just want to talk about to make sure we're philosophically on the same page as we detail the final budget for presentation to you as a draft. Some of the questions are that we just need answered before we do that, before we pretend that it's a draft and final as a draft. The first thing we'll talk about is something we've not talked about yet much, is the ARP money that is being deposited, that is coming. You're going to end up with quite a bit of money over the next 2 years, 2 budget cycles, the budget cycle you're in and the budget cycle coming up. There's been reports of $3 million to $4 million and change. The projects that are eligible for that are, generally speaking, are water and sewer projects, to be honest. The other projects that are eligible or harder to deal with, there's a little bit of burden of proof there. If it's economically disadvantaged, you're trying to offset that, which is you then have to prove the economic disadvantage for where you're trying to put it. Really don't know how you all feel about the use of that money. What my thought was as a recommendation, I always like to have a clear recommendation. The year we're in, I would suggest you have a significant amount of utility projects that are on the books to be done coming. For example, Spears Creek was a renovation that was somewhere between $800,000 and $900,000, for example. We've asked for some money from the federal government as in the form of what is called a STAG grant to offset some of those expenses. I would suggest using this initial run of CARES money this year, the first $2 million of it, to attack your SSOP program that we've had to deal with, because
SSOP being what?
Sanitary Sewer Overflow Prevention Program,
Okay.
which is we know we've talked about before that being a point of emphasis for the federal government, the federal EPA. We are aware that they are moving towards cities our size with agreed orders to make finite solutions. This does give you a leg up to begin to address that. You can address in the utility fund, you can address your various pump stations. There's probably 3 pump station projects besides Spears Creek that you would kickstart by using that money in this year.
Is any of those in the present budget under utility fund?
We have listed those as utility fund projects right now. We've not cut them out yet, right?
Okay.
We're not, we've just not made, the budget is showing all of everything in, right? Like there's nothing been removed. So if on that sheet, before we get into it, there's quite a bit of projects listed for the utility fund, about 11.7 million. I can go through those for you and break those out. You've got significant water distribution projects that's funded with that KIA loan, for example. But there's a gap, and right now that gap is in that number, and that is including, for example, the Noblick pump station design, the Old Perryville plant station renovation. There's a lot of those loose ends that can be addressed using that first portion of the money at least. And then what my suggestion is then is that gives you some time to think about or to see what other things have become eligible uses for those through interpretation, through implementation of that money. And so the second half of that money, maybe you look at it differently and try to incorporate it more for those other uses as they become approved. I'm just suggesting that we know water and sewer is good. Let's think about using the first round, the first half of the money towards water and sewer in this budget for capital offset, and rather than be the test waters for eligible projects. Let's do what we know is eligible. The second half, if there's some good ideas that folks come up with that are deemed eligible, then maybe we'll see some of those for our community and lean into those. That's our opinion on how to implement the CARES money. And so unless you all philosophically disagree with that, what we'll do is we will craft the budget to reflect those expenditures for that capital work in the utility fund as it's designated, water and sewer infrastructure. With one caveat, the broadband. We would dedicate $250,000 of it for the broadband initiative this year.
What will that get us?
Well, that's part one. And so your broadband to do what the middle mile part where you can then begin to demarc and serve people from is about $1 million investment. Right now, what I'm, if we were looking at the next 2 years projected, you're looking at $750,000 next year and $250,000 in the budget you're in. You can use you can use that $1 million of CARES money for that, right? If that's what you want to do.
As opposed to water and sewer projects?
Well, that is, that was the caveat I was trying to get towards, and I probably should have led with it more clearly. The CARES money can use for water, sewer, and broadband,
Okay.
right? So I'm suggesting in the year you're in, carving out potentially $250,000. The reason I didn't lead with it is that's really a decision you guys still have to make, right? So what we're still trying to do, and I know the Marshall and some of those folks are meeting today to continue to develop the cost and the implementation side, not just the fiber installation side, right? What do you do with it when you got it? You're a dog catching a car. Yeah, anybody can put fiber in, but what do we do? That's part of our problem now, where we have fiber at these different locations throughout the state, nobody's doing anything with it. Well, let's go all the way and find out what the outcome looks like before we make a final decision. What my suggestion is, though, is in the budget we're in, let's account for as if we're doing it until we decide not to as a community, right?
Personally, I don't think we can afford not to do it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either.
So on the 250, while that's a first step, does that accomplish the first step?
When I say 750 next year, what you would do is you would do a construction project, and by me delineating it in that way, my suggestion is that the outcome won't be done until late summer next year, right? If we could speed that up and put it all in the fiscal year we're in, potentially, I just don't know when our organization side of it will take place, right? So I don't want to just assume that you're going to get all your infrastructure in this year. Does that make sense?
So 250 more for planning or is it for actual hardware?
The 250 is for installation.
Installation,
Right.
okay.
And so what my point is that installation will likely not start, if you all
until
tell
the-
us yes right now, we would have to do some organizational things
Right.
still. And because of that, likely you're going to start a winter project. And so my guess is you're going to spend a portion of it in this fiscal year and a portion of it in next fiscal year. If that doesn't happen and it all happens in this fiscal year, that's fine, because we've accounted for it, because we're suggesting you're using the CARES money, right? So that CARES money is going to come in the fiscal year you're going into theoretically. And so you can adjust as you go through the budget process, is what my point is, if it speeds up. No big deal. But the greater point is that what we're talking about is using the CARES money to do water and sewer projects, the initial part, and also anticipating using CARES money for broadband, if that's what you all want to do. Now,
So-
that's our initial pass.
So one of the things that strikes me is that this CARES money is kind of a one-shot deal, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems as though there's continuous funding opportunities for water and sewer. out there, as we've, over the years, gotten a number of those?
They are not significant, well, they are significant. We've had good luck with them. But over the last 10 years, everything's trended towards debt, right, for those federal programs. This is a chance to get theoretically equivalent grant money to offset some of those, which is a good thing because it stabilizes rates, right? It keeps infrastructure, buys time, does. So the problem with the CARES money, though, right now, that's the only projects you're really looking at. That's one of your key defined uses for it, and that's a point of emphasis for it, right? Water, sewer, and broadband, right? So it's easy. We know they're going to be eligible. We know it will hold up under our audit. We know those things going into our budget. Right now, the idea of what's eligible has not been tested. So rather than assuming we can figure out a use for it, let's just lean into it. For the first part of it, we know what's eligible. Let's do those. And now if we can come up with other projects that are eligible for the second half, let's do that. So I'm not saying obligate all your CARES money. Caveat to that too is like I just said about Spears Creek. So we've submitted that for a STAG grant, and it has been pushed forward to the folks in Washington to consider. Right. You could get additional money, not from our direct allocation, from different programs, various programs, that could adjust how you do it, how you implement your capital too, or implement your projects.
Now, is there additional monies out there for things like broadband?
Absolutely is, yeah. But we also don't know what that cost is fully yet either, right? So right now, it's still a placeholder as we totalize it. And so, for example, the last mile part, rural development has a strong program and we know that through the ARP money, that's being shored up. So yeah, there's additional money there, but we don't know yet until we get our full accounting if we'll need that extra money or if $1 million we'll get that part of it also, right? So you may be applying for that money to finish out your project in the last mile side. So it's complicated right now until we get fully all the way dialed into what that expense might be, then you're kind of just sitting here with placeholder for that.
So it seems to me, just hearing, if I'm hearing what you're saying, is the absent using that money for the utility fund, any Plan B may or may not be eligible for the money ultimately.
That, through our contacts that we have reached out to, that is what we've been led to believe.
That would include broadband?
Broadband is no. Water, sewer, broadband is good.
Good.
Right.
Okay.
So to restate that simply, is in the year we're in, or the proposed budget, what we're suggesting is water, sewer is eligible, then let's do our next round of SSOP work. Let's initiate that with your first half of your CARES money. As we get to the second half, which is next spring, if we learn more about the CARES money and different eligible uses, then we'll look differently at it.
Will this completely cover the cost of our initial project initiation?
For those projects? Yeah, yeah.
Does this also include the disinfectant lighting out at the lagoon? Remember us talking about this for a number of years? I don't know if it's infrared or some type of lighting.
The UV system at the wastewater plant. So the $11 million still considers us starting the wastewater plant in the fiscal year we're in, keeping in mind that you've already, that's borrowed money to pay for that. So we have the money. We're working through what to award. We've received bids. And so there's something also that Marshall is working on to suggest. We have accounted for that in the budget as if we're proceeding with that project. Yeah.
So,
The UV system, the disinfectant at the wastewater plant, it's at the end of its useful life, yes. The project phase one replaces that and totally and upgrades it to a higher capacity, right? And so that is extremely necessary, and that is in our budget to continue that project, yes. Go ahead, Kevin.
Lost my train of thought, Earl. So you say we have already borrowed the money for the wastewater treatment plant?
Correct.
So the CARES money can be used to reimburse money already spent or indebted or not?
It can't
Just-
replace your debt.
Okay,
Right. It can't offset your debt. We could use it towards a project expense like that, yes,
okay.
but it can't replace your debt.
Right.
Can't be used to pay off debt.
Right.
Can't be used for operating expenses, things like that.
Regardless of what the original debt was for, okay.
So I guess we need to kind of go down the line here and get some idea where everybody is.
That would help, yeah.
Kevin?
Your final, keep in mind, your final approval is not today. Your final approval is when we get the draft budget in front of you, and if y'all sign off on that, then we'll have a first reading. So you're going to approve ultimately the distribution of that money with your approval of the budget, right? But for today, as far as direction goes, this is how I will build the budget based on what you all,
So just to be clear on
Right.
the choices here, so we're all on the same page, it's either spend, whatever it takes for wastewater and $250 for the broadband, or, some increased allocation for broadband and less wastewater. Is that a fair
yeah,
way to say
less
that?
wastewater, and basically sit on your CARES money until you decide what to do with it.
Okay.
And all we're saying is that don't sit on it, let's go ahead and do something with it, at least the first half, right? Does that make sense?
So now the choice is to do wastewater and sit on the CARES, or to go ahead and use some of that CARES money for broadband. That seems to be the distillation of this, right?
Whether or not you want to incorporate the first round of CARES money, about $2 million, into your capital program for water and sewer and broadband, or not, in this fiscal year,
Or
a percentage of it.
water and sewer, and hold on to the 250 for allocation later.
That's a percentage of it. So you could hold on, you could not reserve broadband money out of it. You could, it's like a potpourri of options. You could tell us.
You're gonna get a potpourri of suggestions.
I know, right? Yeah, I'm trying to consolidate. I'm trying to figure out how to say that for you. I mean, you all, I'm not trying to take a decision away from you. I tried to come up with a recommendation without taking your interpretation away from you, right? So like you could suggest, we only want to spend $500,000 this year of our CARES money, of the total CARES money allocation, okay, within our, and if you want to spend that on broadband exclusively, then our budget will reflect that, right? And so therefore, we will have to adjust what projects you're doing this year accordingly. You all could say, spend all $4 million of the CARES Act money this year on X, right? Or on sewer projects or water projects. So what my suggestion is take the first round, which is about $2 million, and invest that in your capital program for sewer, and also your broadband initiative, and then your first $250,000 of your broadband initiative, and then hold the rest of it until next spring, basically. So are the other $2 million of your CARES money.
So we still have the first round of CARES money that we haven't used yet?
The first round of CARES money was really seen as revenue replacement, right?
Right.
So that basically is operated for us as if that's what it was.
So it's gone. been
It's
used.
incorporated into your general fund revenue as if it were revenue. So therefore, any revenue that you did not spend this year, you still have
So if I
Okay.
said,
That's
as
set
cash on
aside.
hand.
But that's been set aside. So how much,
It's set aside in your reserves, which then, so if it's revenue replacement and you have reserves, then we can get into the other items in capital. For example, what do you want to fund out of your reserves? Do you want to fund streetscape? Do you want to fund things like that?
And when you say CARES money, are you talking also about the next
Yeah, let's
group of
clarify
money is
that.
the ARP
Any
money?
money that we've already.
that the same?
Yeah, no, it's not. Any
Okay.
money that we've already gotten is CARES money designed to be revenue replacement, really.
Okay,
The second round of ARP money is what I'm talking about,
okay. And how
Right.
much
The-
is that?
about $4 million.
Okay, and how much, is that on here, how much we would need to do the sewer project? That's on here, on this sheet?
What we are suggesting is that $2 million of that $11 million number under utility, about, and I'm rounding up for simplicity, it would be funded with CARES, with the ARP money, right?
Okay, so we
Right.
can, of the four, we can use 2 million. And then, how much is the broadband project?
The
What's-
broadband is part of that 11 million, and it is approximately 250,000 in the year we're in.
But not total.
No,
What's the total?
$1 million
Million.
right now.
And $1 million gets you what?
Gets all of your middle mile in and then you have to decide how you're going to do that last mile, which
Does-
is what we've called the middle mile. So to get into broadband, so there's fiber ran to the courthouse, there's fiber ran to different spots. Then that really isn't a solution. You still have to extend it farther in order to provide service from it to a home, right? So what I've called the middle mile is that next step, so that then you can provide service off of it. There's different funding sources for that final step, right? There's rural development money, there's other opportunities. Once you finish this middle mile, the extended farther part, but you're not, and I don't have the details of that yet, which is why we're not talking about it fully yet. You will make that decision on your own time, right? When we get the information, we will detail that, and then you'll make a final decision on what you want to do with broadband.
So of the 4 million, if I said, Earl, have you got $4 million worth of need out there in water and sewer?
Oh, yes, yeah, easy. Yeah. I mean, you've got that Spears Creek Force Main that's $1.5 million, right? We're talking about the pump station at 900. But there again, it's just the weirdness of the time too, because you have no idea if, we've given all kinds of project profiles out to elected officials at the federal level, at the state level, and we don't know if we're going to get additional money or not, because the federal government is allocating money for infrastructure investment, and they are giving a lot of money to the state government to allocate. There's CDBG money we may get. We're aware that we got the Brownfield grant, which will offset future expenses in different ways and spur economic activity, hopefully, if we can clear some properties. I mean, there's a lot of things like that is moving right now, and it's really just hard to predict what you're going to get money for.
I'd say we put as much money of the million towards broadband to get it going.
Yeah.
Because that's important. It's,
Yeah.
number 3 on the list of what people ask.
So you.
Water,
Yeah.
electric, internet.
So what then we're describing is what we will reflect in the budget, if we reflect exactly what you say, is we're going to get about $4 million of ARP money, and we're going to allocate some for the SSOP work, sewer work, and then another $1 million of that so you're going to end up with about $1.5 million unallocated if you do that, right? So that's not spoken for an eligible purpose, all right? So let me say this
Do
too.
we have to allocate all of it?
What we're talking about today, I will send to you, try to reiterate and I guess regurgitate what we talk about today and send that to you so you get a little bit clearer picture of what we're describing. But that would be our tack,
I
is,
mean, I would be good with 3 and 1. Yeah, I mean, if we can easily allocate $3 million towards sewer, and you think we can get broadband going for $1 million, I'd say go ahead and allocate it and get it going.
yeah.
Because that's, I mean,
We can build our budget
Broadband-
towards that if that's what you all feel like.
What's the
I don't know what
downside?
else you would do with it.
What's the downside to what she's proposing?
Not a lot, because everything you do, and you, I mean, you're stabilizing your rates. Everything you do is covering yourself for the future, and you're going to have to borrow money to do that, which is going to inflate your rates above and beyond just the expense, because it's going to be long-term, and then you're going to have reserves you're going to have to meet and things like that. So
when you.
to me, it's a good, there are small projects that need to be funded really out of reserves. And our rate structure, we've always been a break-even rate, which means we pay as we go, right? So this offsets that a little bit and can reduce the need to borrow money against those small projects, right? So like the renovation of that plant in Perryville may be $200,000, and it's done, right? The renovation of Knob Lick might be $500,000, and it's done, right? But if you have to figure out how to pay for that, then you're gonna have $1 million bond issue, and you see what I mean? It cleans that up over the next couple of years too. So it's helpful. It pays it, you know.
The, something you said initially made sense to me, and it's kind of saying the same thing, I think, but you said, allocate the first 2 million and then hold the 2 million back to see what the projects that you have started might need going down the road.
Right, well, because your
So-
opinion might change
Right.
based on the
So,
environmental
To me,
conditions.
that's still sort of the same thing. There's 4 million going to very needed projects. It's just according to how they shake out as we do them.
Yeah, and
Because
then,
Stuff comes up, stuff may not come up. I mean,
so Marshall sent us, you know, his list of utility capital, and even last night, I kind of shifted a couple to next fiscal year, because I know he can't get to them. You know what I mean? And so and that's misunderstood too. You know, how long have you been working on the fire station? 5 years. You know,
Right.
how long have you been working on the Perryville Road water line? It's a continuous thing, and it's not a delay, it's just what happens. It takes a while to build stuff, right? Especially at the rate that we've been building stuff since the inception of the water plant, right? It just takes a while. And so you can still, if you get through this fiscal year, by the time you get to next spring, if you don't like the economic conditions, if you don't like what we're trying to suggest is we can stop a lot of things and see where we're at too then, right? And so I'm trying not to get yourself out there to a point where, because it's still unknown, the recovery's still unknown. So there's a lot of things that we're talking about, you just don't do a lot right now. That's groundbreaking in a sense. You kind of let things ride for a little bit until, because, you know, like I said the other day, in the general fund revenue, we're at 80, at the end of April, we were at 84% of our pre-COVID revenue on occupational taxes. The financial thing we went to, seminar, whatever you want to call it, said we're going to get to 90% by the end of the calendar year. Okay, how do we budget? So we budgeted for 87%. Right, so we believe, okay, well, if we get to 87%, we might get to 110, who knows? Or we might get to 85, right? So we're still trying to manage through. It is harder, it is almost harder to manage now than it was last year, because last year everybody just stopped, right? Well, now your need to serve is increasing again, and your budget's being impacted, and you're now it's when it's uncertain. You see what I mean? Like, for me, at least it is.
So this money's coming from the federal government directly to us, or to the state and then to us?
To us.
This broadband, does that cover any of the installation of fiber in the water lines like we've talked about?
Yep. So your middle mile, so it looks like to me, and Marshall will hopefully will will be able to describe this. I think he's even gonna talk some Monday, maybe he'll give you an update, I don't know. I think he was gonna be on the agenda for an update for the utility, project updates and whatnot. It looks like that a fiber-backed wireless network is really the most economical, right? Having a wireless link from town, which is where your fiber is now, that we would have access to Perryville is very difficult, right? But we are constructing a new tower along the way, and we have a tower on the west end, right? That's a very high elevation, right? So if we have fiber to those demarcation points, then your wireless equipment operates at a substantially higher efficiency and capacity. So it's the middle mile, getting to your hard points is that's your middle mile for me, the way I look at it. Then once you get off of those points is your last mile. How do you serve from those points? And that's a lot of it just looks like, and the people we've talked to, that wireless connection from there is probably the most economical, but also extremely reliable too, because we're going off those high elevations. For the same reason water works at those elevations, Wi-Fi would work at those elevations, right?
The county is not interested in partnering?
We've not, it needs to be, it's like anything else, it's going to have to be a utility to
Okay.
function.
Got you.
And the easiest way to do it's in an existing utility, because you're going to marry it to your water lines.
Right.
So rather than create
You know,
confusion there, just
So are
own
we
it and
getting
marry
away
it.
from the idea of running this through the water line?
No,
that
that's
covers
your backbone fiber network isn't using your water line. That's the most economical. I mean, it's almost the cost of the fiber itself.
so
right?
for
It's
the
very
million,
affordable.
so for the $1 million,
Puts in
does
all of
that
your middle mile.
include putting the fiber from here to the water tower in the water lines?
Yeah, it's your installation of your middle mile.
But the distribution,
Off of that, it's got to be customer driven. So you would set up a utility where people would pay for service, and that would cover that last mile expense.
but the distribution does not go through the water lines to the customer's home. It goes through
I don't think,
wireless.
there may be times where you do that, right? So if you're going through fiber from here to, say, our sites in Junction City, the airport road tower, you're going to pass the airport. Yeah, you would serve them straight off your fiber.
But maybe eventually it would go to each,
Right, like,
or
well,
an
it's,
area of homes. or-
it's really a hybrid
Yeah.
approach, right? And so as you're passing the hospital, if they need improved service, they would tie right into your fiber, right?
But this is the first time we've talked about adding some kind of repeater signal up on towers.
Well, you're going to have, well, and that's why I was waiting for the full plan to be proposed.
What's the timeline on the distribution of 4 million?
We could have the first half hit our banks this month,
And the second half?
next spring, this time next year.
So you're saying we may not be able to even do the sewer project until spring, or might not be ready after, we can plan now and then wait for that money.
Well, it's a series of projects. It's not just one. Goes back to what I said. You've got like the pump station over here and a pump station over there, and all of those need renovated. And so you've got to design them, you have to get them approved with the Division of Water. There's a process to all of that. And so what I'm suggesting is let's just start the process on those projects, and if we need to stop with a set of plans and shelve those for 6 months, we can do that. See what I mean?
But why would we do that if we know that there's a need there and we know that the federal and state governments has already said to us, you need to fix this or else we're gonna come and have real serious conversation?
No, that's totally correct. I'm not suggesting that you would stop. I'm saying that you would still have an option to stop if you all, you know, keep in mind, we are not making long-term decisions is what I'm communicating. Right. I'm trying to communicate that you're going to have different approvals along the way. So, for example, you're going to approve an engineering contract. And all of these points, you can still stop it if you need to, if you, quote, need to. Right? I'm not suggesting that you should. And the reason I'm focused on not attaching the long-term decision right now is because we still don't know, for the reasons I said there before. Now's the unknown, right? Workforce is tight. Everybody I've talked to, you're starting to see, I got an email from the chief today, you're starting to even see price wars for firefighters and other things. And so we really don't know what the next 14 months, 15 months are going to hold. And so let's just get started, half of it, let's keep some of it in reserve, and let's kind of see how things move. That's what I'm suggesting with your ARP money.
I agree with that. I think that's well thought out. That's a good idea.
So we got three choices. We've got all water and sewer. On the opposite end of the spectrum, all broadband.
I'm rolling broadband into water and sewer because it's going to be a utility function. So when you look at it on the budget, that's where to be.
Right, and I'm just trying to figure out what's the group want to do in terms of the allocation of that 4 million. Isn't that what you're looking for?
Yeah, and we've had a recommendation to half of it go towards your first 250 for broadband and sewer infrastructure.
Okay, so let me try it this way. I'm gonna ask for a show of hands. I'm gonna ask for a show of hands in a number of different ways. First way will be, is there any support here for allocating all of it to just water and sewer? Is there any support here for allocating all of it to broadband? Okay, now we're down to the fun part. Back to the 4 million and the allocation of the 4 million. Let me,
Are you wanting to know about 4 million, or you want to know about 2 million right now?
How much do you want to allocate right now?
Do we need to talk about,
Start with that question.
do we need to talk about the whole 4 million, or do we need to talk?
I think you do.
Okay.
So you got two choices. Do you want to allocate all of it, or do you want to allocate the first half of it? That's my show of hands, who wants to do that?
So,
That's the first question, really, or what percentage do you want to allocate?
well, let me go back this way. So
Okay.
we take down, we're all in favor of splitting the money. So let's look at it this way. To narrow it down, three choices. 3 million for water and sewer, 1 million for broadband, split it evenly, 2 and 2, or flip it and say 1 million for water and sewer and 3 million for broadband. Would that help you?
I don't think the last is necessary, the last
You
option.
think we can do broadband 4 million?
For two. I think, but there again, you're going to have rates, and you're going to have an organized structure, and you're going to have new revenue that you would project. And so that model, I don't know yet. I know that we have an estimated cost for that middle mile is X, right? And so then implementation of that, the first initial step of the last mile is covered under the million theoretically.
Which is easier to get funding for, water and sewer or broadband?
I'd say right now broadband. Because you do have the influx of money that we don't know the details on going into rural development for broadband expansion. Right?
It helps me a lot.
See, I'm kind of in favor of Earl's original plan, just because I equate this when I used to get money from home when I was in college. Couldn't wait to spend it. Ended up, 3 weeks later wishing I had some of it back, and it didn't. So I don't want to get us in that position. This is a one-time deal, so I don't know. I don't think holding back a good portion, or at least half, shooting the 250 at broadband is necessarily a bad thing, because you have it there to use later as needed.
That's kind of what I wrote down. I wrote down 2 million now, 2 million later, just because the money's not coming yet, except we know half is
Right.
coming. So I'd
Yeah,
rather talk
that-
about just that part.
Yeah, that's a nuance too. Yeah, you never know. Yeah.
Well, that's
And
why I asked, if
That's
we're
why, yeah.
talking about the whole
That's right.
4,
Yeah.
or if we're talking about 2 and 2.
Yeah.
And I'll take Kevin's and kind of twist that a little bit of ways, and that the federal government, they may say, we're gonna allocate that. That doesn't mean you're gonna get a check.
That's- You've seen that happen to roads and lots of things.
Yep.
So that, I guess that's why I was kind of talking about 2 instead of 4.
Okay, so what we'll do is, unless you all voice opposition is, we will build the utility fund budget, including the first initial step in broadband, and off of the $2 million of the ARP money being allocated in the year we're going into. We'll cover the rest of it as we see what happens.
You want to reiterate that for me?
We'll do what I originally said. So we'll build the budget, and I'll send you an email to describe that, because it's complicated, and I know that this is there's a lot of that today. It's a
We'll do what I
philosophical
originally
discussion.
said.
It's a philosophical discussion,
I
right?
like
It's
that.
not a detailed discussion. And a lot of it has to do with how you feel the economy, and what do you feel you think you're actually going to get the second half. I wouldn't want to say we're going to do this with $2 million that we don't have yet.
I
Exactly.
think the
Right.
people that don't have the money is federal government. Do you realize that 80% of all of our outstanding indebtedness has been issued within the last few months?
Yep,
I mean, it's just massive.
it's massive.
Yeah,
The
and
the
I
one
guess that's kinda
caveat.
what I was thinking is, we're not guaranteed that 2 million in the spring.
No, and so, dealing with the first half now is conservative probably. And the other thing, a lot of other countries are doing it as bad or worse than the United States is, like almost everybody is doing it. That's the evidence that was given to us.
Doing what?
The issuance of these large pots of infrastructure investment. You know, everybody from Japan to China, everybody's doing it. And there's an element of trying to, and from what was communicated to us, this is a different discussion a little bit, but it's just trying to close up that workforce. It's trying to get that last 10% of your people back to work. And it's not shown in the unemployment rate, it's different, it's embedded, I guess, but I don't know. So we'll.
Don't worry about that.
No, no, that's way above this discussion. But, so we're going to approach it like that.
I
And
would only focus on
the
the
first-
2 million that we know, so we know for sure that's coming.
It should hit the bank this week. Yeah, counties have already gotten
Okay,
it.
okay.
Or counties started getting in it last week.
I'm good with only talking about that.
Okay, okay. So we'll narrow in on that. And that will be what's in the budget. Now, like I said, I'll try to get an email trying to describe the conversation we're having. The next thing I would have is, we're not proposing any new debt this year.
I make a
Right.
move we adjourn since he's gonna do what he recommended anyway.
No. Well, I didn't mean to
kidding,
come
I'm
off like
kidding.
that.
I liked it.
appreciate
I
that.
liked it. I liked it.
He had to explain it for 45 minutes, though, for us to all
That's right.
buy
No,
it,
that's
so
right.
that was
That's right.
well worth, yeah.
That's a good discussion.
And
It's
then we
complex.
went all full circle, we're
It's
like,
a long
"Oh, I
circle.
see now."
It's $2 million, though. That is a substantial amount of money.
It's huge, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
Right.
But it's kind of like,
yeah.
you don't spend your check until you got it in your hand.
And
So-
if you can't think of anything to spend it on, I have utility issues at my house that I need a new bathroom, you know.
In this budget, you have the debt-issued projects is your wastewater plant. You have outstanding debt for your public works renovation, and you have fire station debt, and you have the water tower debt on Perryville Road. That is existing debt that is funding those construction projects, and we are not, and you don't have anything describing this for you right now. This is, again, a philosophical approach. We're not contemplating adding any debt to the equation in the year we're in, for sure, right? Like,
We're just looking at trying to finish things.
if you all, when we get into the capital right here in a second, if you all want to fund capital above your operating capital, you're digging into your reserves to do that, which you may want to do that this year so we'll talk about that here in a second, but we're not suggesting that you should borrow money in the year we're in, right? Revenue, general fund, compensating rate on property taxes, no increase, right? Everybody agrees with that? No increases on any other tax rates should be proposed, in my opinion, especially right now, even if you have an initiative that you're trying to figure out how to fund, right? Everything's flat. The utility fund, water and sewer still, we're waiting on the cost of service study that's coming. We did get some preliminary numbers from them. We built from Salt River. We built the budget based on those. If you may or may not remember, but it probably would be like a 10 to 15% sewer rate increase. The driver of that is your debt that you picked up for the wastewater plant the year before last. Okay? So we picked up that debt and have not adjusted rates to cover the debt payment. Yeah,
We still operate at a zero net profit.
it's at no profit, that's right. So what happens is you adjust the rate to cover that debt, then you have your operating capital, your rate-funded capital then back in play, right? So there's like, what is listed? I have to get in the spreadsheet. Your pumps, replacement pumps that you got for 4 pump stations, that's a capital expense. And so that would be out of rate-funded capital. So that cushion that you had pays for those things, right? And so we're anticipating that proposal coming soon. It could come maybe we could even get the report this week. I've not got it yet. I did get a text from Salt River this morning that they're getting close. And so that's in the budget. That's the only adjustment, but that's the driver of the adjustment. Okay? No other revenue proposals are out there. Before we get into community agencies, I've got this sheet in front of you that's got the capital that is in your draft budget in a list. The first sheet has police department at the top. The equipment that you see from there all the way down to the second gray line, any equipment in there is what was in your long-term capital plan that was given to you last year. It just rolled into this is the year that you're supposed to buy it. As we've looked at it, we've not peeled any of that out because we did not do a lot of capital acquisition in the year we're in, so we're a little bit behind. So that puts you back on track with capital acquisition. So you got, for the police department, $220,000 worth of supplies and equipment such as body armor, for example, $25,000, right? The fire department has $115,000, including a new heart monitor, 2 of them, $70,000, right? Communications is pretty straightforward. It's $22,000 of capital there. Again, this is really what I'm calling operating capital. This is not construction capital.
That's what I was gonna say.
Right.
This is a recurring expense.
Correct. And so these items are when I'm describing rate-funded capital, this is the type of stuff for the utility that cushion usually covers, right? Public services is $232,000. The biggest expense there is a $175,000 street sweeper. Ours is near the end of its useful life.
When do we put our employees in a hot box? I wasn't aware we had.
Well, the hot boxes, you weren't supposed to say that out loud, Kevin.
I'm sorry.
I should have grayed that out. My bad.
What is a hot box?
That is for asphalt. That helps improve the application of pothole repairs and the application of asphalt for pothole repairs.
Sounds like something from Cool Hand Luke, you know?
Yeah. Josh's recommendation on the wayfinding was really $180,000 over 2 years, $80,000 in the year we're in. Parks and Recreation, we are showing a $590,000 investment. A lot of that is your existing, you've got a couple different things. Your ADA structures is $225,000. Right, those are the Land and Water grant and also that play grant that we were getting. Land and Water will occur in this fiscal year. The playground will likely end up in big part of it will be in this year. So those numbers will vary slightly based on when those expenses occur, whether or not they make it into next year or they get done in the year we're in.
What about expenses for Jenny Rogers? Where will that?
So if you go on down there to inside of that parks, it says Rec Center Parks Development Aquatic. That $125,000 is to detail with cost planning for all the facilities. So you've acquired the fairgrounds, you've acquired Jenny Rogers, you have Michael Smith Park that we acknowledge we want to redesign and re-envision those things. And so that will require some effort. So the first phase of that re-envisioning would be done by staff, but at some point we need to deploy experts to talk about what the costs are based on the Parks and Rec master plan. So we're going to go through the master plan. We're going to conceive of uses out of the Parks and Rec master plan that was identified in there for those facilities. And then we will go through a public process of some kind where we make a final recommendation for all those properties, right? The fairgrounds, the Jenny Rogers and Michael Smith Park as primary. So this budget will fund that process.
But it doesn't fund the result.
Doesn't fund any capital out of it. You know, no, it doesn't fund what you want to do with the fairgrounds. It doesn't fund what you want to implement at Michael Smith Park. It just says, okay, this is what Michael Smith Park will look like in the future, and this is going to be your cost to do that fully. Most people don't understand why you have to do a study on things like that. I've tried to describe, and you've heard this before because you were in the meetings with us. You have to understand the utilization rates of concrete space. You know, so like a water slide. If you're doing an aquatic center, you don't have any idea how many kids per hour you're going to get through a water slide. So when you look at your demographics, you need to understand then how to scale that so that you get your proper goals achieved. Those types of things, which is why you need experts to help you plan your cost. Otherwise, you're spitting in the wind, right? So the first phase of any good plan is to develop a good plan, and this part helps you do that.
So, in essence, these types of studies is money well spent.
It's money that saves you money in the long run.
Yeah, once you do some of these type projects, you gotta live with it.
That's correct. So
If you spend the money incorrectly, you still gotta live with it.
that's correct. So the Parks and Rec master plan was a vision for the organization as a whole that detailed things you have missing. Now this step is looking at the facilities you have and doing a finite plan for those facilities using the information you got from the Parks and Rec master plan. Hope that makes sense.
Earl, I was just going to ask you about Jenny Rogers. I mean, technically speaking, if somebody wanted to use it, or if we had a use for it now, we could use it.
Our goal is to have it usable by the end of the summer for stuff.
Okay.
Right, like we're working through that now. Staff, I know Josh and Ashley, for example, were down there yesterday for an extended period.
Is that in this budget come up, or is that something we can do?
That would be out of operating expenses
hand,
ultimately,
okay.
yeah,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
The operating budget for Parks and Recreation as a department,
Okay.
yep. Stormwater program, that's self-funded, that's just the next phase. The utility fund we tried to talk about, the biggest thing we have there is the initial beginning of the wastewater plant project. You all will have to award that before that happens. The upper part of that $3 million is just continuation of the water tower and water line out Perryville Road. Right. The 1755 number is a reflection of that ARP money being included in that. So when I'm talking about $2 million, that's a big chunk of it there. And then the capital expansion is $250 for the broadband. 250 of that 340 is broadband, and then 1755. So when we get into the detailed budgets, you'll see those numbers in those detailed budgets.
The 3.4 and the 5.8, where's that money coming from?
The 3.4 is you have two sources. You have a KA loan that you got in I guess it finally processed in 2020.
Okay.
But you have, that was $5 million total. You have remnant money from the water plant expansion for that purpose of about $600,000, $700, something like that. Then you have borrowed money for the wastewater plant, which is you've borrowed about $10 million.
Okay.
Cemetery, that's a drawdown of what is currently reserved for the cemetery. And it's an upgrade of adding the committal shelters. And certainly, any of those things can be nixed if you all see this list, and as you all provide feedback, you don't have to do it today, but if you just see something that you don't like and you want it to be removed, and we bring you that first budget, that first full draft budget, that's when you tell us, yeah, we really don't want to invest X or Y, right?
I really would like for us to, at some point, everybody pull out the master plan for the cemetery.
And have a presentation of it.
Yeah, because, you know,
Yeah.
we spent the money to do it. We go into great depths and large numbers on a lot of other necessary items, no argument there. But we kind of treat the cemeteries if it's, okay, we gotta, you know, we gotta mow the grass over there, yada, yada. I think there's a whole lot more there that we should and could do.
Yeah, we need to be more proactive. The property to the south of the main gate was acquired. They're actively working on developing that now. Right, they're going to be removing some of the trees that was created or were installed, I guess, to be a border. They're pulling those out so that it opens up in that space. They're actively working on that now. It's not a capital project because it's, you know, seen as operating, as an operating expense now. But we from an operations standpoint, in terms of how the environment looks around the cemeteries, we can probably do a better job, no question. Operating is pretty straightforward, right? We have that covered with our operating budget, but we need to do a better job of implementing the ideas in the master plan, such as landscaping and things like that.
Let me drill down on that a minute. So how long would it take for engineering to make a presentation to the commission? Here's what we need to do. Here's how we need to do it. Here's what it's gonna cost based on estimates, and here's the timeline to do it.
We, I think Marshall's on there Monday. We probably would anticipate Public Works being back in front of you soon with an update on various projects like we've asked the department heads to do. We will make sure at the next time he is scheduled to do that's part of his presentation. We'll spend time on that whenever that is. I think it could be, they just talked about a staff meeting, and organized the next 3 or 4. I can't remember if Josh was in June or not. He did one at the last one, but when was, you're sitting right here. When was Josh saying he was coming back?
Probably June or July, I would think.
Yeah. So when he the regular commission meeting that Josh provides another update, we'll ask him to spend time on the cemetery master plan.
Is there a plan for a structure of anything, of any kind in the cemetery?
That's
That's at 220.
That is that 225 is the committal shelter.
Okay.
It's there, at both cemeteries, the committal shelter was designed and located. So it's,
Okay.
it's development of that concept
And that was
into-
my next question, is
Yeah.
the one at both?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it should be a priority for the cemeteries to get the shelter
Yeah.
in.
Getting it moving as a reflection of the expense showing up in your budget is important.
I personally would like to see the presentation in July. It gives them time. I think we need to put a stake in the ground.
One of the things that is increasingly
Part of the plan.
worrisome for me, just as an individual, not necessarily being tied to the city, but we've removed a lot of trees out of there over the years. And necessarily, because it does, you know, when I first came, our turf quality out there was terrible, right? Because we had a lot of evergreens that was creating soil conditions that didn't promote turf growth. And we were, you know, and there was just an overabundance of that. And so we went through the cemetery committee, through the recommendations of the cemetery committee, you know, we went through a period where we've removed quite a bit of trees. And then in planting back, we're not planting at a rate that we've removed probably, to your point. And so we do have to do a better job with things like that.
Now, Bo Weston's done a great job with his program. Could we suggest to him that maybe allocating his efforts?
Well, this past year, you know, we had a private donor donate 30 trees, I think, 20 to 30 trees. I don't remember the exact number for Hilldale. And those are installed up there. And that was Nathaniel Donahue. You know, he didn't want any credit, but he did that. And we would anticipate trying to maintain a working relationship with them to get additional trees, you know.
So again, I asked the question,
Yeah.
could we request a bow, or is that even something, is that something we have direction over, that we could direct those funds?
That, we have never, you know, it's really been steered out of the beautification committee ultimately, through the tree group out of the beautification committee. It's something you could do, but you got a demand for planting everywhere. And the cemetery really should stand on its own too, right? I mean, if you want to improve that environment, then let's invest in that environment and be more direct about it. Because his program, you know, is highly dependent on when money comes in. And I, you know, I think you should be more overt in the cemetery probably. You know, be more direct. Cemetery
Well,
is
that's what
plural.
that's what I'm advocating here,
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you.
to direct
Right.
those funds to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you want to adjust the cemetery budget, because, you know, they don't have any money to speak of to do that.
Everything you do in the cemetery is an offset from the general fund.
Right.
Right. Just to be clear, but let's get started on what is in the budget this year, and let's listen to his presentation, and if you want to put different pressure on him, you can just tell him.
Let's change the word pressure to emphasis. How's that?
Emphasis, that's correct, yeah.
Okay.
So you are requesting we see that in July? Mayor?
Okay. Yeah, he'll be here he's coming back at one of the meetings soon. Yeah. So then when you get all the way down to the parking fund, that's clearly the elevator water shield is a big number there. And then you get to the items identified below that, which are not in your budget. And the question is, do you want to include them in your budget?
You're talking about below the gray line.
Below that second gray line. And above the gray line, you have $759,000 worth of projects that your operating capital, exception of the investment in Parks and Recreation and the elevator shield and the cemetery upgrade. That's how much you're doing in proposed operating capital. So then below that, you've got the fire station under construction. You have Public Works buildings are still, you know, we're trying to get that started. And then well, I included parks down here, so the
So-
759 did not include parks. That was my fault. I just got in a hurry there. So the first three is kind of what you have ongoing. Then below that, you have a list of things that we've contemplated.
Starting with land planning, correct?
Yeah, that would be minor acquisitions over the next year. And, you know, we can name a couple. Church Street expansion. Do you want to begin the process of doing that? That's part of your downtown master plan recommendation. I feel like that we should try to go ahead and get started on that if that's your all's pleasure. The Stanford Road trail, we need to cross Stanford Road. That's going to be a required. The state wants a median there if you're going to cross the road, and so that would be a minor construction project there. And then the streetscape, you know, it's roughly a $3 to $4 million project. $4 million. This was sand without the utilities in it. So $4 million with utilities. So that $3 million needs to be a 4.
So is this a capitulation that we are not going to get any streetscape granting from the state?
I think you still got to pursue that while you're planning for it.
Okay.
and decide that when you're going to bid it. So by the time you get your plans done, you're going to be looking at advertising in January for construction period of next summer. And so that's just the reality. I mean, that's just kind of where you're at based on approvals that that's going to be required through the Transportation Cabinet, et cetera. And so do y'all want to do that? And when you get into these last, so the beginning with land and down, to fund those, when I said no new debt, I would suggest funding those with your reserves. Right, drawing down your reserves a little bit to offset those projects.
Let me take that a different direction. We are at have been at a historically low in interest rates. And while I know debt's a four-letter word, when you spend money out of reserves, that's capital gone. You're not gonna get that back until you begin to generate additional funds. A lot of communities are using debt at this time because of the historically low rates.
Debt could be justified with your streetscape project.
Well, it would,
to be honest with
interest
you.
we would pay on the debt is less than what we would earn in our reserve.
When you consider inflation, that's true.
Right.
Right. And so the question that I would have is that's the list of projects that we can legitimately do and begin in the fiscal year we're going into, given everything else that we're facing as a community, right? We got the fire station under construction. We have all this other work already going. So you really, at the end of the day, can't do more than what's on that list just because you're out of man hours.
Earl, does it make sense for us to have a separate conversation with some thoughts in between to say, thinking long-term, what could we fund with debt if we let that debt out now before interest rates got any higher?
Yeah.
They are going higher.
So we could, using the Parks and Rec master plan, for example, you could peel out of that the needs that had costs tied to, projected costs tied to those needs. You just don't know where they're going to go, right? Where those, so you could look at it like that, absolutely. And borrowing is extremely low right now, and it could go up. And so if you believe that you're going to invest in capital as you go through the planning process, then borrowing the money now could be useful. I do think that the streetscape definitely could be funded with debt as an alternative.
Well, this list right here is under $4 million.
Well, the streetscape was a typo. That was before we knew the cost to bury the utility. The utility, if you bury the utilities, you're going to spend $4 million.
Okay.
So it's under
So-
$5 million there.
So, yeah, we're still looking at $5 million.
That's
While
correct.
that sounds like a lot,
It,
in relation to the overall budget and the overall debt, it's really not that much, and it's a very low interest rate.
I do, there's a strong argument that can be made that investment in the capital that you're looking at is economic investment.
And I was gonna say, this is all economic development right here.
And it's the dirty work of economic development. It's if you add Church Street as a project, you're taking on one of the steps in the downtown master plan. If you do your streetscape, you're taking on one of the steps in the downtown master plan, and one of the steps, quite frankly, that we need. You know, it goes back to what was shared with me one time on the street where, I got one guy that wants, and you know this now as a realtor, I got 3 guys that want me to sell their houses, and I just sold the house on the right and the house on the left for $300,000. The guy in the middle says, sell my house for $300,000, and I go and look at it, and it's not been renovated since it was built in 1960, and it's very difficult to do that. His house is worth $180, right? So you don't want to, a community, a city is just like your house. You need to renovate it. You need to update it from time to time so that when you do have investment coming, as you do have visitors that come, as you do have these things, you are up to date. You know, you're modern and you do have a perceived value that is market comparable. That's the argument that's always been made, and I tend to agree with that philosophically, but you all can tell me what to do, right?
And-
So,
Talking about the master plan, I know the discussion has been, the key starting point is at Fourth and Main, but it seems to me it's shifted to the key starting point now could be Church Street for us.
yeah,
And then
I mean,
move
we're
from there.
working on all of them. The thing with the corner on Fourth and Main is you still have the fire station there, and you're still building over here, and so you know, you can't, there's things you can't necessarily immediately do right there, but you can immediately start on some of the other things, which that's one of them. And, you know, one of the you know, there was an article in what was that? Was it Woodford County? Might not have been Woodford County, where they're looking, trying to get the Jessamine County, trying to get the LOC to go ahead and renovate their judicial center. We need our judicial center renovated. We need to, and the downtown master plan acknowledged that even, and we didn't ask them to. And that's one of the recommendations that came out of that was you need to update your judicial center, right? And so we need to meet with county judge, and we need to assemble a committee, and we need to go ask the LC to fund our judicial center. We're one of the only, 17 counties or something like that in the whole state that's not had the investment
Out of 120,
out of 120.
only 17.
And we have it is our understanding that the plan that our consultant suggested to us was nixed simply because the county didn't own the property. Well, it's city property, right? So it's the city parking lot on Third Street. I mean, we've seen it out of the master plans, his recommendation was. So why not, you know, let's go talk to them and figure out what we need to do. Because there's no question our county is struggling with space. You know, we all know that. Anybody that's been in the courthouse knows that. And we're not suggesting we are spending their money for them or nothing like that. Please don't take that in the wrong way. But
So if we wanted to consider, I guess we would bond this if we considered that and
save your reserves, yeah.
save the reserves.
Bonding, that's not necessarily a bad approach at all because the cost of borrowing is so low right now.
The 150,000, or where was it? Church Street,
Church Street.
150? What's that 150 gonna get you?
Construction,
It will get construction.
it depends on there's depends to it, but yeah, it could likely, because it's a simple construction project. Believe it or not. I mean, there's not a lot of earthwork, there's not a lot of utilities to relocate, there's not a lot of those ancillary expenses. If you got into that, yeah, it'd be like 400,000 probably to build it.
Now,
But-
and when you say that, you're talking about how if we, according to the master plan, extended Church Street,
One block so that Martin Luther King wasn't,
and that's what that construction would
that is what
cost?
that construction, that right of way.
Do you-
Move all the way down. One road.
It would go all
One
the way
block,
over
yeah,
to-
just one block.
what would that
But there again, if you get into, so that's one of those you need a detail to really know.
Yeah.
But when you get the cost per foot to build a road, that's kind of what it boils out into. But if you get into utility relocations and some of those other things, it could go up. There's no question. And so we're not trying to underprice it to try to make it appealing, but it's one of those that we've not designed to. And so if,
Do
you
you
know.
need a decision on these, or is that something we can defer to a separate meeting?
You can defer to a separate meeting. What I was going to do is after I left today, unless you all told me not to, and you're certainly welcome to do that, is I was going, and we can come back early next week and talk about it again if you want. Philosophically, if you want to decide, we would really like to borrow money for this, we would like to save our reserve, those levels of questions, if you want to give me an answer on those even Monday night, that would be fine. But, and we can anticipate that discussion if you want to. But we need to build the draft budget based on some of those philosophies. And so we'll continue to do that. And right now, we are showing that that comes out of reserves. If you all want to transition that into a loan program because of the low interest rates, saving your reserves, which would probably be a wash in the long term with the rates where they're at. Would you not agree? I mean, you're a financial advisor, right? And so,
I'd take advantage of the rates and talk about holding back on your cash.
Holding-
This would hold back on cash.
Yeah,
How-
I think we, I think we need to hold back in reserves as much as we can. What do you think, Cottle?
Well, I can't argue with that. I think that's probably, and also I think, I don't know if it would or not, but it seemed like it'd move up the timeline a little bit if we did it that way.
Yeah,
Because
true.
people have been waiting on the streetscape construction forever, and the sidewalks are still a little iffy in some of those areas, and we need to get that finished. I was wondering if we bonded that 4 million and then, use the reserves for the other smaller projects, but I guess for the difference in what it would cost us in payback, it wouldn't
well,
really
the cost
make
of
any
your
difference.
issuance is what you would, just
Yeah,
your
if you-
cost of your
yeah,
issuance
if you-
alone would
Yeah.
break
If
your
you're gonna issue-
savings.
If you're gonna issue debt, you wanna, the cost of issuing $100,000 is significantly as a percentage versus 10 million.
Okay, yeah,
as a
that makes
percentage.
sense, yeah.
So what we would look at, and we'll talk to Compass Financial, which they were here last week, gave us a debt report. What we will ask them to do is consider allowing us to see what I would suggest, do you want to also add money for your initial phase of parks investments?
I was just gonna ask, so, if we're gonna issue some debt here, should we add some of the utility capital on here and, some of
wouldn't do
that'll
that.
be reimbursed? Do we
Yeah.
add, some Parks and Rec on here?
Yeah,
Do
Parks and Rec,
we-
I think is appropriate, because keep it as a GO, because that's what you're talking about. The utility right now, just to implement it,
And the
because we
utility
know-
funds are usually different too, right?
well, it is, but you know that those utility projects are eligible for that ARP money, right?
So we'll just
So-
use that as we get it, kind of.
Yeah, that's what I would suggest on that, and
Well,
wait and see.
Here's the other thing is, we don't know the number, but there's been a lot of cage rattling about a major funding from the federal government for infrastructure projects,
Yeah,
of which things like street construction and streetscape, all that would and economic development.
yep.
And that's a very broad term unless they specify what that means.
Would they consider Parks and Rec under economic development?
No, but your parks expansion would be the investment of, yes, to
And-
answer your
and
question. You're
cemetery.
saying Parks and Recs, I'm saying, referring to it differently. Yeah, it does.
And cemetery expansion, things like that. To me, this is a very broad, strategic discussion that I think requires a significant amount of thought. We're talking about what do we need to plan for in the foreseeable future. And foreseeable in my terms is, next 5 years.
Well, it needs to be something you can actually implement too. So you can borrow $100 million, but you're not going to spend it at a rate that it's ever going to have.
No, I get
You're
that.
never going to get it spent.
But
Right.
we know there's some immediate things that we need to do, and then there's some things that are immediate that we'd like to do. I give you an example, a new swimming pool. Well, it's an immediate need, and we'd like to do it. But it's not an immediate need that we definitely need to do. But now, if you got the capital to do it, then that shifts it a bit. And that's what I'm talking about, is we know we're gonna need to expand cemetery, we know we're gonna need to expand Parks and Rec, we know that there's an aquatic center issue out there. We know that there's some other big projects out there that we've talked about, and there's probably some other projects that the rest of the commission would wanna highlight that we've not talked about.
Investment in streetscape is and I've said this before, is your dirty work of economic investment. It just is, because you know, the average person really doesn't conceive of that as payback, that you get payback on that, but you do. Then Parks and Recreation is quality of life, goes right to the core of what you're doing. When you're talking about trying to recruit people to your community, investing in that isn't really, really important. Trails, the whole bit, pedestrian pathways.
Well, and then, and as you mentioned, I hadn't even thought of it, but we've got to figure out something to do with the courthouse. That's a major engine for downtown.
Oh, yes. Right. Which is why the downtown master plan consultant identified that and provided a trigger to make us think about it.
Right.
Right.
Would it be beneficial if, maybe it wouldn't, but I think we've come to some consensus on the streetscape and some of those things being bonded. Should other things, could we prioritize them, or do you want to prioritize them and compare them with our priority list, or, it seems like, I don't want to seem like we have a blank check here, because we really don't.
No, but we have identified needs.
Yes.
I mean, so the
But I would
conversation's
think that-
happening,
I would think there's a ranking in the needs.
correct. And
But we don't, and Kevin's right, but follow up on that, in my opinion, we don't have a complete menu of the needs.
Well, that's true.
We haven't really sat
Well-
down and
Well,
talked about what are they.
I agree.
you have a menu, but you've not evaluated what you want to order. And so the menu is your Parks and Rec master plan, and you've acquired land. So now you have a table to eat at, look at it like that. So now what do you want to order? And so you've got to, so the next step is deciding on that. And then, so we can create a scenario that you all can hold and look at that probably will organize that for you in a more thoughtful way now that we hear your feedback. Yeah,
Well, but I think
and so
that-
I will definitely, we can spend some time on it, and it will make sense, hopefully it will make sense to you.
And if we're gonna address housing with the downtown master plan, which is kind of what this Church Street project would be, that affects Parks and Rec, because if we're gonna attract people to live here, they have to have recreation and something to do and somewhere to go. So that's, to me, that goes hand in hand.
Oh, yeah. It's all quality of life.
Yeah.
economic
Yeah.
development.
Yeah.
Well, and your, Mayor, your Parks and Rec plan actually gave you, leaned into a prioritization of those things for you. So, so that's already, that work has already been done. It's just not immediately fresh in your mind because it's been a while since we've done it, it's been a year or so. So, and we've gone through a lot. So we're gonna pull that back out and organize that and see what a debt profile would look like, and we'll get RJ involved and we'll figure it out.
One of the other things that has surfaced is we don't have enough of housing like Arnold Towers,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
where
Yep.
it's not assisted living, but it's,
Single adult living in a controlled environment, so Josh is working with the Housing Authority, and they're going to do the site visit next week, and we'll see what they learn, and we'll just wait to see what they say. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's needs that society is facing. We're no different than that. It's just, are we going to be upfront and address those and be honest about the conversation and saying we need to address it?
Right.
this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
Ms. Jeannie? Do you have any thoughts? Seems like we're skipping over you.
Yeah.
I don't mean to.
You've been
We're-
too
Well,
quiet.
She's
I've
been very
been
quiet. She's
taking
learning.
note. I have one question. My first question is, how much do we have in reserves?
Unrestricted, you have, it depends.
Because I'm looking at the carry forward, but that's not.
No, it's not
the
complete
same.
yet. That's not complete yet. We're waiting on the audit to detail the final number, so I would hesitate to say the exact number. But you you've got to keep in mind also that your operating revenue citywide is about $50 million. So you're trying to keep a percentage of that
Right.
in reserve. So
Right.
you're looking at holding about 19 million of unrestricted funds that is in reserve right now. Now, you also know
That's
you
the
have.
goal, or what we think
That's
we
what,
have?
that's about what you have right now.
Oh,
But again, we're waiting
What
on
are
the
we
last audit to
required?
verify
Aren't
what
we required a certain percentage?
self-imposed and also based on some of your bond covenants. So my point is, that's a complicated question,
Right.
right? Until you get your audit, which we're waiting on that right now. COVID definitely hurt that,
Okay.
yeah.
Because that changes, you
It-
know, your thinking when you want to use reserves. I think the streetscape could be a hard sell to the general community. It was a hard sell for me. I'd spent weeks going through wants. To me, it occurred, like, it seemed like a want at first. Let's make it prettier. Is it a need or is it an investment? And then I started talking to a lot of people, and every single one was in favor. Like, it shocked me.
Oh,
Even
yeah,
about
street-
burying the power lines.
Right.
I thought it was $1 million, what? That's dumb. Who would, you know, let's put that in Jimmy Rogers. I could not believe, like, every single person was in favor. Like, I was shocked. So just trying to get what the community wants. My ears are open, but I still think if you borrowed for it, it would look good. Like, it might be an easier
Well,
sell if we just
it-
used the money we had, but we'd have to have enough in the reserve.
Well, that's totally true. What the mayor's point is, though, and I'd reiterate it, is the borrowing costs are so low right now, it's
Right.
equivalent of using reserves,
Right.
is what his point is. And so it's really,
I know, and I just,
so you're gonna have to
I
build
have
those
the
reserves back
Dave
up.
Ramsey mentality, so I have to hear that with two open ears, but as a
Absolutely.
person that the streetscape was a very hard sell for me, and I had to work through a lot of talking to people. That's just where I
Well,
was
the
coming from, but I
si-
see now it's covers needs and it's a great investment.
Well, sidewalks, you know, is
So-
the main thing that streetscape.
Yeah, that's the genesis of it. is they
Yeah,
need
and
People
sidewalks
trip
are infrastructure, so, You know.
And safety is important to everybody.
yeah. and
How do you
so-
feel about the Parks and Rec investment, too? Do you feel good about
I
that?
think that's more important
Yeah.
myself, but just from community input, very important. Just a big need. Even the pool I'd put up there, like we talked, huge need. Our kids just have been.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think we need
Not
to
having enough for 'em.
start to plan a facility for Parks and Rec, because planning, you know, funding, actually breaking ground, you know, you're looking at 3 to 5 years. So
Well-
we need to talk about that now.
As staff, we are talking about now, and like, we're working on it tomorrow. You know, we have an hour and a half set aside to work on that next steps, right? And so we're working on it now as staff, just bottom line. And you're right, it will take a while, whatever you do. It depends too, if you have the money and you're wanting to get it done, then that's a different equation too. Then we put different emphasis on it, and we can then deploy different resources towards it, right? So that helps. If we know, in other words, we know that there's a budget for it, it makes it much easier for us to find the man hours to do it. Because we can get additional
And
resources.
I don't really see it as prioritizing, I see it as putting the puzzle pieces together, because if we have a nice Parks and Rec facility and our sidewalks are terrible and we don't have any trails and you can't get there, then that affects Parks and Rec. So it's all kind of fits together.
Okay, so that was good discussion. We'll keep going. I kind of understand where we're at right now. So
What
that's
is
good.
the Southern Connector planning?
That's taking the road east and west off of, that we've talked about, off of Stewart's Lane,
Okay.
and taking that a step farther into a more of a preliminary design.
I got you.
And
That's what I wanted to make sure of.
we're talking about doing that ourselves locally and not waiting for additional outside resources.
I had one more question. The other thing, how's housing affected by the Church Street construction? I'd have
The-
to get my picture back out.
The downtown master plan indicated putting pressure on the properties immediately around it to be redeveloped. And,
Like this road.
yeah,
That might have been the one I had a question on in my book.
yeah.
Okay.
I could spend more time with you on it because then it
Yeah.
would make more sense.
Oh,
Yeah.
we'll do that then.
Yeah.
I'll put this on the, star that for asking you. And I really liked what Kevin brought up about ranking needs, because that's just something I've struggled with. And just looking at what the community feels like is most important, and just, I'd like to look at a ranking of needs. That's all.
Okay.
I was gonna say one more thing. You're talking about bonding versus, taking it out of reserves, and what
Yeah.
kind of, I was reminded of something that, y'all remember Annabelle Gerard, I'm assuming. She said that when you bond something, everybody that's gonna enjoy it is paying for it. If you pay it out of your reserves, money you already have on hand, then people who just moved to town or whatever, they didn't have any hand in paying for it, but they get the enjoyment. All these people have to pay for it. And she never thought that was fair, and I never looked at it that way, but I thought, yeah, that's one way to kind of twist it, but
Yeah, that
I
was,
don't know.
it took me a while to get my head around that too, and it's really, that's more, it's easier to identify that on the utility side, so that when you're looking for the wastewater plant, you don't want the users today spending $20 million on the water plant, right? You want that distributed so that in year 2032, the people that are using the water plant are paying
Right.
that appropriate bill. And that's our point. And like I said, it's easy to see that on the utility side. Same thing applies for parks. Same thing applies for streetscape, right?
Well, we would need, for me, it's comparing the rate of interest, the rate that we pay the bond back, or at what rate do we have to reimburse the reserves? So that's really what we're weighing here, because
Right.
we got to pay it back either way.
Right.
Yeah, just when I had looked at it, initially I talked to Earl, like, why do we have so much in reserves? Because my understanding was a certain percent, and I was kind of looking how other governments were doing it, and it was looking like it was double, you know? So
Well-
but we really don't know the numbers to see. Like, I
you
don't know if
do-
we have to
But I'd rather
replenish
have
it.
more than we need in reserves than to
Right.
need
That's
more
what I
than
was
we
getting ready to
have.
say. You're better,
Right, right.
in today's market, with the unknowns that we're looking at, it is totally reasonable to maintain a healthy reserve right now.
Like 6 months versus the
Like a
recommended
year
3
versus 6 months, kind of
Gotcha.
thing. Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
That would be good.
Community agencies, let's get onto that. So I got your sheet
Can we
here.
take a 5-minute break?
You can do it.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I thought we were done. I thought we were.
Hopefully, this won't take
Yeah.
very long. So, but yeah, let's take a break.
Okay. I was rounding to the nearest 100, or like 500 or 1,000, but that's okay. We
Well,
can-
you're wrong.
So 700, so say 500? Is that right? Denise? The way you want to look at it, or?
I want to do 7. That's a nice group.
Yeah,
Is that okay with you, Denise?
yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
1,500 for the next one, 1,800 for the next one. 64,000 for the senior center, is what the average was. 3,400, so say 3,500 for that.
What did senior citizens request? See, 66.5.
Their request was 66.5, wasn't it?
My thought was they did more with less than about anybody I've seen.
yeah, I had them at 66.5.
I did too.
I had a paper that said they asked for 1,000 more, but must have been my wrong note taking.
No, I'm
No, you
just,
did 60, 64
Nah.
one.
We'll keep it at the 64,
Yeah.
yeah.
14 on the brass band.
Wait a minute, you skipped family services.
Oh, he said that one a second ago.
No, you didn't.
Oh, let's see.
So what'd you say on family services?
3,500.
Okay.
The next one, brass band, it was average of 14,000. 26,000. 700, 750. Let's keep it at 2,400. 750. 1,000. 7,700. 500.
could we round Shepherd's House to 8?
I can do it.
Does
Yay.
that
Yeah.
hurt anybody's feelings?
No, I'm all right with that.
Where are you, Kevin?
Shepherd's House.
Shepherd's House.
Okay, I see what you're saying, all right, yeah.
250 for West T Hill, and say 7,000 for Wilderness Trace. Then the bottom three, the airport board's 10, planning and zoning 75, and EDP at 70. And then that brings, just using those numbers I just read, and we'll email this to you today so you can digest it some more. Certainly, you can adjust it as we go further into the budget process. I had, in the original budget projection, I had put in like 109. The numbers that you all projected is at 134, roughly 135. That's reasonable and probably at this juncture, because you're adding unallocated. Last year, you only put in 22, I think, for the Senior Citizen Center, for example. So that's really kind of where you need to be, probably based on the needs that are identified in the list. And so,
I broke my numbers out for an allowance for EDA, so that, I don't know.
so you had
I don't know if you did see that.
I did, and that would fall under a different part of the budget, not direct allocation to them. So you're,
Okay, well,
so in non-departmental on the budget.
I
you're-
didn't put my EDP number at 70.
Well, I put, oh, my bad, I didn't, if I missed that, that was my fault. I misinterpreted that then.
You want to read?
Talk about being a
What?
curmudgeon, I was.
Have him reallocate that?
Yep, my EDP number was 25.
Oh, I misunderstood that then, that was my bad.
So if you did that, what would that take the average down to?
To actual,
61.
to the actual EDP partnership, my number was 25, and then I had taken, I had actually written down 75 towards the EDA.
Right. So in the non-departmental, I did put in 34, because it's going to take you a while to get bylaws formed and do things that some of that front-end work too. And you
And
really,
by the way, when's our joint meeting?
I don't have it scheduled yet. I'm waiting on her to call me back. We'll get it.
City county, or city county EDP, or?
EDA, if you want to talk about the EDA with the county
That's just gonna be
directly.
city county though, right?
Right,
Oh,
city
okay.
county, yeah. So I did put money in the non-departmental to aid in the establishment of an EDA.
Okay. Yeah, I've been talking to Earl too about, like a lot of communities do 3% of their occupational tax to reinvest. And he was looking at some numbers like,
Yeah, if you're better
to
off,
reinvest in town, but,
well, when you're doing
Development.
economic investment, like the streetscape is a big
Right.
chunk of economic
Right.
investment. So you're investing way more than $70,000 in the economic investment to start with. But what my point too was, is that, rather, if you try to create a policy that says 3% of all occupational taxes will be in this, you can't make that decision long-term for the next commission. So the next commission can just throw that in the garbage. So, right,
could do it
like,
for 2
so you're
years.
better off to just say,
or
we
if the
want
county
to,
liked it.
we want to dedicate, or you could mutually agree on how you fund the economic development with the county and saying we each will contribute up to 3%. You know, you could create an interlocal agreement there. I mean, there's things like that you could do. But just to restrict yourself, you're better off just say, we want to, Earl, put in $300,000 a year for economic development, right? Like, that's cleaner and tidier long-term and easier to manage with future budgets. 'Cause
But
you
they
don't-
could change the amount they pick though in 2 years.
They could, and they could change the percentage.
Well, we could still do the percentage, but it would just have to be year to year, right?
Yeah, and so you're better off just picking them out and be done with it. In other words, pick the
Some
programs you
difference.
want to fund and fund those.
We can look at
Right.
what that number would be and say, okay, this is how much we want to put.
Correct.
Okay.
I just like percents because if business is down, you know, you.
It self-adjusts.
It self-adjusts, and if business is up, you can, I don't know, save some to reinvest. I just don't think we're investing enough. I think you all feel like that too, right?
Yeah.
Investing enough in
That's why I'm,
economic development or EDA or EDP.
I would hate to, and this was my fear when we talked about the EDA was, you know, pulling funding or whatever from the EDP as a group. And I guess my fear is that we concentrate on purchasing land and getting it all ready, but we don't have anybody out hawking it and selling it and putting it out front and doing the things that we want them to do. So I think we have to be careful not to overload on one end and ignore the other, so just a thought.
Would the EDA also be able to promote, like the EDP doesn't do, housing, and would they be involved in, like, bringing about development, or like you were talking about the,
Can I speak
housing
to that?
development, or
you
some
know,
needs that are there?
the
Could they
ED
help
the-
on these needs?
The EDP, yes,
It's
I'd
just
love to see
industrial.
that. I'd love to see that because
Residential.
the
EDA
EDP,
can't do
It's
that.
the name
EDP
res-
talks about a lot of these kinds of issues,
Mhm.
but there's no mechanism for follow-through. I
Well,
think
that's
the
probably the issue then.
I think the EDA.
Yes, and that's a good way to look at it. That's
think-
actually a good part.
I think the EDA, as it develops, all the other EDAs around the state have somebody that they've hired to market and to address actively these particular type of areas. I don't know why we'd want to be any different.
I thought the EDA could purchase land. I thought that was
It can.
Right.
I thought that was its only purpose.
That would, correct. So it's to provide, on the implementation side, when you're talking about asset development, this is what you would use to develop the asset, is your EDA. What we've talked about is that the city has needs of communication with our businesses, and if leaving the EDP exactly the way it is with Jody, right? Like, so we're having to fill in gaps of economic development with staff hours who's dedicated to do different things. And so the idea is that, do we need more man-hours available in the community to help? Probably so. And so does the city have it, do we have our own point of contact for economic development that's supporting all activities? And a lot of cities do, in spite of partnerships in your overall economic plan, most cities do have internal staff that's that point of contact for us, right? Because we're in a meeting right now. So if someone's needing something, if Jody's needing something, I can't necessarily be there. So most cities now in today's world, goes back to what we've talked about in the past too. I mean, we want to have a relationship as a city government with all the businesses inside of our city on some level. We want to know who they are, and we want to be in a position to support them. And so that's hard with existing staff. And so that extra labor really kind of bridges that gap of communication inside of your city. And then more broadly, from an economic development perspective, through your partnership, you're supplementing that effort, really, is what we've talked about doing in-house. Right now, I do some of that, Josh does some of that, Marshall does some of that. Question you guys can have in the future is, do you want to do that with a designated staff person really pushing that?
So, but that,
Who's pushing the
Board.
downtown master plan staff is, right? So
Right.
do you want somebody helping with that? And so then the question is, if the county wants help with that too, then the likely landing spot for that staff then suddenly becomes your EDA probably. But if the county don't want any part of that, then you're better off just making a city employee and be done, right? But
I guess my issue was what Stephen explained the EDA as being was a property purchasing entity. And to me, that doesn't include promotion and all that kind of other stuff. Not that that's not needed in City Hall, but I just didn't picture it as being part of the EDA, I suppose.
well, I think the EDA, so we've agreed to form an EDA. Okay, that's the first step. Once we form it and put our designated representatives on there, then I believe it's going to take on a life of its own. But that board will need to decide if they want to use the funding from the city and county to hire someone pretty quickly, maybe, or maybe they're going to use that to invest in some land. But I think eventually they're going to need that person to market what we have and to market the city and to deal with other than industry, economic development. We housing, commercial, Main Street, the master plan is a big part in that. And I really feel like it's going to take on a life of its own. But all we need to do right now is focus on forming it and getting the board established. And once we do that, then the board can address the details from there.
well,
Am I right?
your interlocal agreement establishes the EDA.
Yes.
And then your board has to establish bylaws and do things like that ultimately you all have to endorse as the owners of the organization. So there's several steps to that, and that will take some time. The EDA is, if you go back to look at the task force report, there was a need to be more efficient and more capable of publicly funding or publicly providing land as an economic incentive through grant and whatnot. This is the only tool that you can have to do that. So regardless of how you really ultimately want anything else to happen, if your goal is to improve your footing competitively, and you feel like that you have to have land or to be able to contribute very directly inside of a financial package, your EDA is how you do that, right? So it's a tool for the community to use initially. That's the purpose of it.
I'll wait till the bylaws come out and see how they look.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But saying it like that, is a little bit confused with the county right now, it seems, which is why they've not yet approved it. And so the joint meeting can help that understanding. So there's,
I just think it's very limiting to say that the EDA is only going to buy and sell land. I just think that's very narrow-minded, frankly.
Let's,
Well, that's what it was sold as, to me anyway, so.
let's do what Kevin says. That's step one, and then we'll see where it is from there.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't want to duplicate, like we have
No.
this, and we don't want to duplicate, but there's all these missing pieces if there's, I guess, those things, like residential. Anyway, that came up, I was talking to landowners this week, and two people had some residential development talks, and we're trying to find out information, and, the EDP didn't handle that type of thing, and I was like, well, maybe planning and zoning, and I should, reach out to you. But it was just hard to know where to send them.
But the person at the economic development position, which technically we have one of those, should be able to address that. That's my whole point.
Okay, that's all.
Because it's all economic development.
Can I offer a
Interesting.
thought on a couple of things here? While I put down 10,000 for the airport board, I'd like to propose that we do one of two things, and one of them would be to either add additional funds to the Civil Air Patrol, which would increase our budget, or utilize some of the 10,000 that we've put down here for the airport board and reallocate it up there to the Civil Air Patrol. I offer that for one big reason, and that is you are addressing the needs of young people. If you've not been out to the Civil Air Patrol, it's well worth your time to watch what they do out there. They're taking young people and really giving them structure. And that's a very positive thing in my opinion. I'm not saying anything or proposing anything negative to the airport unless we want to increase the overall funding. Or do nothing.
So the airport doesn't support the Civil Air Patrol at all?
They do to the extent that they let them have a building out there rent-free. But the building out there was, I'll put it this way, the Civil Air Patrol has gone to great expense to fix up that building to where it is very usable.
Let's see, they asked for 5,100. Commissioner Terry has them at 3. That would be fine with me. I mean, I would rather raise theirs than affect the
Well, and
airport.
I put them at 3 because, like the mayor, that's a great program for young people that can
Oh.
really help build the airport.
And I put it at 1 because I was really trying to hold down our funding, as that was a philosophy we adopted 5 years ago.
Well, I mean, that's why we do this. I think everybody goes into their, writing numbers down and thinking, 100 different thoughts, so we come together and kind of come to a consensus of our thoughts, and, 3's fine. I wouldn't even mind going to 5, for.
Well, since we're being philosophical today, this is how I look at these agencies. If someone has to pay to go there, that's not a service. So the service this is assisting people who need assistance. And it doesn't cost the patrons of that service any money, or the money that is given goes directly to the people, like the food pantry. we know for a fact that they take the money that we give them and buy food. And it's going directly to the people that they're serving. I don't think that our money, the taxpayers' money, should be used for operational costs. I think it should be a direct pass-through to the people they are serving. Does that make sense? So that's kind of why we were starting to pare these back, is because people were depending on it and using it to pay their salaries and electric bills. And I just don't think the taxpayers' money should be used to pay salaries. I use the Humane Society as an example all the time. They built a building, they raised, I think it was what, 80% of the money on their own? They came to us one year, they asked for, what was it, $10,000?
Something, it was
It
a
might have
nominal
even been
amount,
more, I
yeah.
don't know. They came one year, they asked for a one-time specific contribution, and they haven't been back. This is how, that's how this should work. Which is why we started to kind of pare it back.
Or programs that you're intentionally trying to push.
Yes.
For example, the Civil Air Patrol.
Right.
If you're
That's
trying
a-
to,
That's a true service.
if you're trying to stimulate a program.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, Pick a number, boss. What do you got?
Well,
You got me, boss.
Don't rush to judgment here.
You calling me boss? I thought you were talking to the mayor.
No.
I know better than that.
Ain't nobody.
Hey, I put 3 because I had, some people that were, I have 3 for
Are you
several.
comfortable with 3?
Yeah, I mean, if you want
That
to,
works for me.
give them 5, that's fine. I got a couple of low numbers and zeros on here, so.
Yeah. Green like the Grinch.
So we will add $3,000 to that line. That brings your total to $136,250.
Which leads me also back to, we should see these people more than once a year when it's time to ask for money.
Yes, Ashley's going to help coordinate
And
that.
I'd like to know where our money's going.
I agree with that as well.
So that's all I need for today. We have gotten good direction on the capital program, on what we need to look at there real quick. And so we may have a meeting towards the end of next week, if we can get everything pulled back together and circle back to you. If everybody's gonna be in town, we'll just see if that works.
Okay.
Okay? That's all I got.
Sounds good.
It was a good discussion for us.
Thank you, ladies.
Do we need to adjourn?
What's Wednesday?
Next Wednesday, the hearing.
Oh, yeah, 26th, yeah.
I'm really sad. That's when fifth grade graduation's gonna be now.
Do we need to adjourn?
Who's graduating?
Finally,
Motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, like sign.
thank
Adjourned.
you.